Hello. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out to join us today and listen in on our conversation on resiliency. My name is Nineshia Mont-Reynaud. I'm the clinical director with the Training and Counseling Center at St. Luke's. And this presentation will be not too long. I think we're just going to go over a couple of models and examples about resiliency, and then we'll answer a couple of questions at the end. We don't have live questions, but just a couple of general questions that I have saved for the end of this presentation. And then also there will be some resources of links that I recommend that you'll be able to access on your own time as well. That might be helpful for sharing with others about resiliency. So this is also exciting for us at TACC, and being able to offer this online and share with others outside of our Atlanta metropolitan area, our workshops that we have done in the past in person. So let me tell you a little bit about TACC. TACC is a nonprofit for over 40 years. We have a mission to provide affordable services, and we have a commitment to social justice. We are spiritually integrated and trauma informed. We have two programs. One is our clinical pastoral education program, also known as CPE, where we offer training for chaplains and seminarians in the urban community and the metropolitan medical centers. And that is led by Karen Miller, the director of that program. She's really great. And then we have the clinical program, where we have licensed therapists and we have counselors working towards their licensure for supervision, who are providing sliding scale counseling services for children and adults in the metropolitan area. And this is through individual, couples, and family counseling. We also have a group. We have an ongoing women's trauma group right now. And there are a couple of counselors that take some insurances. So do feel free to reach out to us, and I'll share our contact information at the end of this presentation if you're interested in reaching out and you have questions about our services. I'll also share just a little bit about myself. I've been serving TACC since 2015. I'm a licensed professional counselor since 2011. However, I've been working in the mental health and social services field for over 20 years in the following areas. I've worked extensively in case management prior to completing my master's program and getting licensed. I've worked in inpatient partial hospitalization, group homes, outpatient facilities, and I also have a current private practice where I work with adults and children with anxiety disorders. I'm also a mother and wife. I love pets, and a fun fact, I just learned how to swim. Very proud of that. So now let's get into what is resiliency. Psychologists define resilience as the process of adapting in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, and other significant sources of threats, such as family and relationship problems. This is from the American Psychological Association. So think about for a minute, what are some other examples you have witnessed or current events where individuals are facing adversity? Now, I'm pretty certain that for many of you who are looking at this in this moment, the first thing that comes to mind for you is the current COVID pandemic. Um, Definitely a time when all of us are facing adversity. The impact is different for everyone, even though we're all, experiencing very similar feelings and situations. This is a really good depiction of experiences that are traumatic. I don't know if you've heard of the adverse childhood experiences, otherwise known as the ACEs, where basically how these experiences, especially how early on that we experience this in our lifetime, have significant impacts on how we cope, and depending on the age, the level of support around us. And as you see at the top there are the effects, the impact of these experiences, and then below are the triggers below the surface there that impact experiences. And there'll be a link to at the end of this presentation where you can access this tree as well. I thought it'd be a little fun to just point out movies that show a theme of resilience. Without getting into them, I thought about some ones that I've personally seen, which there are so many out there, which I'm sure. I also think that movies and books are a really good way of sharing with the community and children when you're talking about these themes, so you can have a really great discussion afterwards. Whether some of these movies are fictional characters and some are not. I really appreciate Wonder, and that is one that I know is shared in the school community where my children attend. It's a really great story of resilience of a child that was born with a health condition that impacted definitely his physical appearance on the outside, and the resiliency and that courage of having a conversation with other kids that may not understand, and of course just dealing with so many things that he had to deal with just even on a personal level with his health, was a really great story of resilience. And here's some others too. So now I'm going to get into the 3 P's of resilience. So Martin Seligman does a lot of work with positive psychology. And for my research, it looks like he's still currently at the University of Pennsylvania. And he points out that emotional reactions are often experienced by adversity that contribute to our feelings of that feeling of stuck or barriers to resilience. And these 3 emotional reactions that he talks about, one is personalization, and that's when we might internalize problems as failure and hold ourselves accountable, and may even have some unnecessary blame for what's occurring. The second one is pervasiveness, and that is assuming that negative situations are related or connected somehow, where we might overgeneralize that one's life is set for doom. And the third is permanence, and that's believing that the experience will last forever versus being transient and passing. And then the feelings of helplessness that one might be experiencing, or hopelessness, that it will never improve or go away. So it can totally make sense, when you really think about someone or your own experience with adversity, why our minds, might tend to go that way. Even if we don't know how, we can make sense of that um, level of feeling discouraged. Um, and I do agree with Seligman that, especially I do a lot of cognitive work, cognitive behavioral therapy, how our thoughts really impact our attitudes and beliefs in whatever we're dealing with at the time. So I think what Seligman was trying to get us to be aware of as well is that changing our mindset, which is having healthy thoughts when things appear out of control, contributes towards building and increasing resilience. So in this section, I've come up with some questions, and then I've also ran across some of these questions on other websites. And at the top here, I have building and increasing resilience takes time, and it is intentional. So some of the questions are asking yourself, what is in my control and what is not in my control? And this is a really important question. I think for some individuals, the challenge is when you can acknowledge what's out of your control. And for some people, everything in that moment feels out of control. And that's where those negative thoughts and those three P's can start to really exacerbate there. So, exploring this question, you might find that there are some things that you can do despite the things that you're really feeling that you're unable to. And we'll talk about that too in an upcoming slide. Another question is, how do I want to prioritize this? And that is, if you have several different stressors happening at one time, um, it can definitely, that also makes sense that it feels like a huge mountain in that moment. But just looking at one thing at a time, if it's possible, might kind of help it seem like it's a little bit more manageable with some support. Another question is how I interpret the situation and how I respond. Well, I think going back to those three P's, acknowledging, your belief and your attitude about what's going on in the moment. Are you having a barrier in your thought process that's keeping you in that feeling, stuck mode? I think that's really important to be able to acknowledge so that you can work with that. And then what evidence do I have for what I am thinking? How you feel is how you feel, sometimes that just can't be helped. But our thoughts often trigger our feelings, and how your belief and your attitude again about the situation, and looking at that. And, I have found that some individuals, in having this conversation who put a lot of blame on themselves or are experiencing failure, more often than not, end up coming to the conclusion that they were not contributors to the outcome of a situation not going well or the way they had anticipated. But in that moment, you feel like that. But there's sometimes not the rationale to support that. And then asking for help, what am I having difficulty in accepting? And I put in here, remember, acceptance does not mean that you have to like it. Acceptance is getting to the point to where you are just acknowledging that what happened happened. And sometimes when we're in that place of trying to figure out how or why, it's hard to move into acceptance. But acknowledging what you're having difficulty accepting is very important. And for those individuals who are faith-based, the Serenity Prayer is a really good theme on this, notion of acceptance about what you can change and what you cannot. And then another question is, what have I learned from past experiences? Maybe you've been in a similar situation, or maybe it wasn't similar, but some of the steps that you put in place really helped you get through. And, even though the situation may be different, some of those same steps, especially if some of the steps that you implemented were surrounding coping mechanisms, might work in this situation as well. And yeah, again, who can I ask for help? Sometimes just taking that step and having the courage to ask for help, is a really big deal. Asking for help does not have to be a weakness, as some might think, because again, the courage to face feelings, to face thoughts, to face situations is really significant. So here, this is actually an activity that I'm going to go through, and this can be done for adults or children. And I know on these particular pictures, you can't see the writing, so that's why I have here. We're going to talk about this. And then also at the end of the presentation, there's a link where you can access this activity and be able to download it and everything. So you'll have an opportunity to be able to look at that closer. And looking at this resilience bucket over here, you're going to be identifying any demands or stressors that might be draining your resilience and writing them down in the holes in the bucket. So right here, if I'm dealing with some financial things or marital problems, they would go right here in these holes, And then we want to acknowledge, maybe on the side over here, healthy coping mechanisms and unhealthy coping mechanisms. I think it's good to have a proactive plan or prevention plan for when you can feel or that there's anticipation that there's going to be a big change or possible stressor. Again, with the COVID pandemic, certainly there are a lot of things that were unpredictable, but some things, you can anticipate. For example, as a parent with small children, I anticipate that children would have days where they may have to do some, learning at home. It may not be in person. And how do I prepare for that? And how do I plan for that? And who do I ask for help in coping? So that's what I mean in terms of, prevention and planning and identifying how healthy ways you might want to cope, and then some unhealthy ways, if any, that you've dealt with in the past that you want to try to avoid. And then down here, you're going to prepare how you will attend to these stressors that drain you as they unfold. And this would be identifying only things that are within your control. We're going to have an example of this on the next slide. And right over here, as you can see, this arrow is going into the top of the bucket. Identify what you will pour into your bucket to fill it up. And that's the beauty of it, is as these things, after things feel so draining, when we're resilient and we feel like we're bouncing back, it's because you've been able to fill that bucket back up. So I have here for an example, we put finances and unemployment are draining this bucket. Some of the things as far as healthy or unhealthy coping skills, might want to stay away from drinking alcohol or eating late at night, or decreasing social media that's not related to job search. And the reason why I threw that in there is that Since social media has become increasingly a popular means of staying connected and so many other great things that it could do, I know that there are individuals that have struggled with um, having negative experiences with social media, especially during times when they're facing adversity, where they might be comparing themselves to other people in their social media, especially those who they know, and finding that it might be further exacerbating their feelings of hopelessness or anxiety or feelings of failure. And so sometimes, when I'm supporting someone, may talk about in ways that we might decrease that, for some time. And it doesn't mean that these individuals or that you're not happy for the other person, but in the place that we're in and we're feeling stuck, it's really hard to feel positive. And some healthy things that we might do is increase eating healthy meals, exercise, or reading daily affirmations that feel positive and encouraging and that you believe in to prepare yourself during this time. And then down here, when we think about things that are in your control, well, for this situation of my finances or unemployment, I might think about how many jobs I'm going to apply to daily. It might make me feel like I have a plan and I'm an active participant in this plan. I also might identify who I need to ask for help, resources for food pantry. If I know that I need to save as much as I can to get by because I don't know how long I'll be unemployed, or networking, thinking about who I can reach out to, who can I contact that might be able to help me with my job search. So these are just a few examples of, the things that, how you can attend to these stressors and identifying what is in your control about what's going on. And then over here on the side, fill that bucket back up. So an example of that might be what makes me feel fulfilled is contribution. Maybe I might decide to volunteer to keep busy or attend a support group or a church group. And that might make me feel like a sense of purpose or meaning in life when I volunteer, or feel connected when I attend these support groups and feel present with other people and in my body when I am interacting in this way. I added this in here. I ran across this online. Again, this link is also at the end of the presentation. They came up with this really great resilience tree. And there are a lot of words on here that are quite small. But some of the things that stand out to me, it says, when people talk about resilience, these are the descriptions and actions that they discuss. So we've talked about these things or mentioned it early on. Mindset, your attitude, grit, confidence, courage, mindfulness, reframing, that's in conjunction with your thinking, changing the narrative, having meaning and purpose, attending to your emotions, self-compassion, flexibility, and also health, attending to your physical health, survival, self-care, sleep and safety, spirituality, connected to our belief system, and social, communication, contribution, intimacy, trust, and planning. So I thought this was a really great example of different things to get us thinking about how we can start trying to build on that resiliency. So now we're going to go into another model, and this is the 7 C's of resilience. And this is when we are trying to build that resilience with children and adolescents. So Kenneth Ginsburg, and he's a pediatrician. It looks like still with the Children's Hospital in Pennsylvania. Leads a discussion on components that he believes builds and increases resilience in children and adolescents. So the first of the 7 C's are competence, and that is obtaining the skills necessary to handle stressful situations. The second of these is confidence, belief in one's own ability to carry out the skills. The third is connection, close ties to friends, family, and community. Next, we have character, and that is the strong sense of self-worth, the ability to empathize and make decisions that do not compromise values. And then we have contribution, the experience of knowing that you matter and that you can make a difference in the world. The sixth is coping, the skills to address the emotional component of stressful situations. And then last, we have control, reassurance of one's ability to address their own personal decisions and actions. And one thing I wrote a note down here is that, when I think about helping others, as helpers, our role is not to make individuals do certain things, but more so to guide them, to empower them, educate individuals who are willing to listen and to learn, help them tap into their strengths, and being patient and being present as a helper is one of the best things that you can give to individuals that you're trying to reach out to. And who knows what could happen as a result of that. So implementing the 7 C's. So some of the things that I ran across in terms of how organizations are, teaching these with the child and adolescent population. One, by stress reduction skills, such as breathing, learning, relaxation. Also by building social skills, where you can practice scenarios and practice, being assertive and making wise choices. So that can be a blend that's very educational and empowering for them, but also having a little fun with that too. And then another one that I saw is practicing problem solving. Again, practicing scenarios with them when you're looking at, decision making or using a decision making tree model with them, or that resilience bucket exercise that we just went over. Another way of helping children and adolescents learn resilience is teaching boundaries, helping them understand, that they have rights to protect themselves and say no, especially when something doesn't feel right or healthy or overwhelming. Putting self first for self-care. And as we're going through this, might be popping in some of your minds that this is also really great skills and techniques for adults as well. And then the last thing I have here is identify individual strengths, and how the child is a good friend, for example, and having them acknowledge this is, not just telling them, but asking them, what they think their strengths might be, and you can give them a little guidance and, pointing out different areas of their lives, and, how are you there for others? And, what are you proud of, when it comes to yourself? Um, do you feel like you're a good sibling? Do you feel like you're a great helper, for your community and doing, for others? So these just again are some examples of some things that you can implement with children, or adolescents. And going back, just thinking about coping, I wouldn't assume whether it's a child, adolescent, or adult that people know how to cope. Coping skills often more than not, especially in children and adolescents, need to be taught and modeled. And so I think, helping guide them in identifying the things that they can do on their own, with no one's help, um, can be a very useful tool. Sure, there's some things that we could do with the help from others, but there's something very empowering to know that there's something you can access yourself, and that you can help to improve your feelings or your thinking in the moment. So I'm going to share a little 3-minute video, and keeping my fingers crossed that this will work well. This is from the American Group of Psychotherapy Association. It's a short video of a psychologist by the name of Dr. Craig Hain, and he will be sharing and speaking to your children about current stressors for family.
Hello, my name is Craig Hain. I'm the co-chair of Community Outreach for the American Group Psychotherapy Association. And I'm here to talk to parents today about when traumatic events happen in your children's lives and in their communities. As a parent myself, one of the things I can tell you is that how you respond has a tremendous influence on how your child responds. And that's the good news. The other thing we have to recognize as parents is that trauma and adversity, as much as we don't want it to happen, is an inevitable part of our children's lives. And so the way we begin to handle those things is going to be very, very important to how they learn to handle those events in the future. These kind of events, we speak of shattered assumptions. What they can often do for a child is be their first experience that the world is not as safe a place as they think that it is. And while we can't control the world, we can really control what happens in our home. And so as we talk to children about events, we want to strike a balance between making room for their feelings, but also being the bigger, wiser presence that we are in their lives. And so we want to give them space to talk in any way and at any place that they can. Children tend to process things and metabolize things in bits and pieces. And so we want to have little conversations and say, hey, if you want to talk about it more, you can come back to me if you have other questions. Kids need us to provide clear information, but they also need to know that we're going to return to the same things in our homes that we always do, the same routines, the same kind of predictability. And so we'll make space for them when they're having feelings and having difficulty with those routines. Parents that I work with so desperately want to guarantee to their kids that they're going to be safe and that the world is going to be safe. And you know your child best. So you think about how much information they can tolerate. And you don't try to reassure them that the world is a safe place because they've just had an experience that's challenged that. But what you want to reassure them is that there's safety in following routines and following the rules that we set in the house and reasserting the values that you have as a family. I think my favorite thing I always remember when a crisis happens is what Mr. Rogers used to say. He said, when a crisis happens, we look for the helpers. And so we point our children to the people in our lives, not just within our family, but police and firemen and security at their schools and principals and all of those people who are there to make sure that their life continues to be safe. And finally, remember that our kids, they cue off of our emotional system, right? Particularly in times of distress. They look at our face. They listen to our voice. They see how we're responding to things. So one of the roles you have is to show them both that feelings are okay, but also that you as an adult know how to manage your feelings. And so we model for them permission to feel, but also the understanding that as the grown-ups, we can regulate and we know how to regulate our feelings. That is one of the greatest gifts that you can give your child in the aftermath of an event that's been overwhelming to their system.
So in closing, some of those things that we saw on that resilience tree slide that we viewed earlier, physical exercise, diet, medical care is so important in terms of, building and increasing that resiliency. And also, you can see how important it is to be able to have access to being able to use these things and take advantage of them. So, advocating for individuals who don't have access to some of these things, when we see them, is really great and very courageous and helpful. Also, sleep and relaxation, play, not just for children, but also for adults, laughter, fun, and dance, increasing and leaning on your social support, having that connection with others and the experience of validation. Also, being out in nature helps towards building our resiliency. And being optimistic, creative, having opportunities where you feel empowered, finding hope and meaning and purpose all help towards building towards that resiliency. And maybe that's something you can do through spirituality and or faith. So here are a lot of the links that I've been referring to. At the top, here's some ideas for activities that you could utilize. I have that stress bucket link here. And also positivepsychology.com has some really great resources and exercises that you can do. Maybe you work with, a support group, a community, some sort of community group or church group, and you're looking for activities. And then here's some references of things that I mentioned throughout the presentation here. And at the bottom, this URL has a lot going on right here, but it's a really great self-help guide for trauma from SAMHSA, and that's the Substance Abuse Mental Health Association. Sorry if I left one of the acronyms out, but that's a really great PDF too that you can look at as well as a resource. So I want to again thank everyone who's taken the time out to listen in this presentation on resiliency. And I want to encourage you to continue the conversation with those around you in your personal lives, into your community, and your work life, and your friendships. And here I have our physical address at TACC, our mailing address. We're currently accepting virtual appointments, and we're hoping that to offer in person again soon. Maybe have a little bit of both. And there's our contact number as well. You want to reach out again, have questions or, are thinking about receiving services. There's our email, general email at info@tac@stluke's.com. And if you'd like to reach out to me specifically, if questions about this presentation or anything else regarding our clinical program, I have my email there as well, and in Mont-Reynaud at tac@stluke's.com. So I'm going to keep this slide here, and we have our Lauren Ellis, our wonderful program manager at TACC, is going to share a couple of questions. Like I mentioned, we're not taking live questions during this presentation, but I wanted to answer maybe a couple questions that might be on some folks' minds in regards to resiliency. So Lauren?
Thank you. The first question I have is, how do I address feelings of failure in trying to juggle home life, work life, and crisis during a pandemic?
Yeah, I love that question. And maybe because I can just relate As I mentioned, myself being a mom and a wife, and you don't even need an extended family in terms of having that adversity of trying to balance things, especially during a pandemic. I think, like I said, we're all being impacted. So to answer the question, I think what we've mentioned earlier in looking at a healthy mindset and being able to acknowledge if there are any of those three P's that we mentioned that become a barrier to your resiliency. Are we putting any expectations or additional pressure through our thought process that's making it feel impossible? Are we asking for help, or are we intimidated about asking for help and thinking we might be a burden to others might be a barrier? But asking for help is something I would definitely recommend, if it's available, and being able to balance things out. Also, looking at what you can prioritize and, what's in your control and what's not in your control is something that we've also addressed earlier as well. And that will help you to be able to prioritize and looking at, what you can address first, what are some of the things that you can do yourself, and what are some of those things that you come up with that you would not mind in getting the help from others. Um, but yeah, definitely looking at the mindset and extending grace to yourself, during that time is something that I would recommend to help you build towards that resiliency. All right, good question. And is there another one, Lauren?
Yeah, thank you. My second and final question is, how do I help others experience resilience, like my spouse or other loved ones, and connect with them during the process?
Okay. So that's another question that I love here. The first thing that comes to mind is, asking the individual if they would like your help, or, gently sharing with them what you notice and seeing if they will be open and receptive to that. Um, and, doing that in a way, and I say gently, in a way to where, um, you know, you can, share with this person or this individual that you can maybe make sense of where they're coming from, especially if they do, share some of their struggles or their challenges that they're having, about the stressors that are going on. Um, it doesn't mean you have to agree to be able to make sense, but when you see things from folks' perspectives, that kind of helps to be able to make sense. But the main thing too, even if someone is not ready to open up and talk about, what's going on and the stressors in their life, just letting them know that you're available and following through with that and making yourself available, I find is also very helpful. And then sometimes if you have that opportunity as well, you know, um, helping them verbalize, some of their strengths, you know, being able to listen or being able to ask for help again is very courageous. Um, whether they're open to, seeking help from, a community faith leader, or a therapist, or so, is a huge sign of strength. And for them, that might be their first step towards resiliency, is just being able to verbalize, yes, I am having some difficulty. Um, and then, if they're open to hearing about some of your experiences as well and sharing that with them, that also might help with building some connection and intimacy, um, in a very relational way, in that moment. So hope that I answered that question. And I think that was the last one that Lauren said. So thank you, Lauren. And again, thank you everyone for your time. Be well.